I'm nothing to you then. Just breeding stock. The Duke's face was stone. Rain hammered the window behind him. Eliza stood in her wedding gown, still damp from the carriage ride, and realized, too late, that she'd been sold to a man who would never see her as human. But what this overlooked woman did next would shake the foundations of English aristocracy. Stay until the end to see how a powerless bride became the most feared force in the county. And don't forget to like, comment with your city, and let me know if you believe love can bloom in frozen soil. The wedding had been a transaction, not the romantic kind whispered about in novels, where two souls recognize each other across a crowded ballroom. No, this was the other kind. The kind conducted in her father's study 3 weeks prior, where men spoke in low voices about debts, deadlines, and the fortunate timing of a duke seeking a wife. Eliza had stood outside that door, hand pressed to the wood, listening. "She's plain, I'll grant you," her father had said. Casual, like discussing wallpaper. But quiet, obedient. The duke won't have trouble from her. And her dowry? That voice was unfamiliar, clipped, cold. What's left of it is his, along with the girl. She'd walked away before hearing more. What was the point? She'd known for years she was the family's last resort, the daughter too bookish, too serious, too something to attract a proper match. While her younger sister Caroline glittered through London seasons collecting proposals like party favors, Eliza had been tucked away in the countryside, managing household accounts and pretending not to notice she'd become invisible. Now, standing in the entry hall of Blackmore Manor, she understood she'd traded one form of invisibility for another. The manor loomed. That was the only word for it. 6 stories of gray stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Windows like dead eyes staring across overgrown grounds. The drive up had taken 20 minutes through untamed woods, branches scraping the carriage like skeletal fingers. And when they'd finally broken through to the clearing, Eliza's first thought had been, a prison. Her second thought, my prison. Your Grace. The housekeeper appeared from the shadows, a severe woman in black bombazine, keys jangling at her waist. I'm Mrs. Hodge. Welcome to Blackmore. The word welcome had never sounded less sincere. Thank you. Eliza's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. She cleared her throat. The journey was long. I wonder if I might... His Grace requests you wait in the drawing room. Mrs. Hodge's expression suggested that what His Grace requested was law, immutable as gravity. He's concluded business in the village. He'll see you shortly. See you, not greet you, not welcome his bride. The drawing room was as cheerless as the rest. Heavy curtains blocked most of the daylight. Furniture sat arranged in rigid formality, every surface bare of personal items. No books, no flowers, no sign anyone actually lived here. A portrait dominated one wall. A woman with sad eyes and a collar of pearls, her expression caught between beauty and despair. The late Duchess, Mrs. Hodge said, following Eliza's gaze, died in childbirth, 10 years ago, come autumn. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. The woman in the portrait looked young, trapped. His Grace doesn't discuss her. Mrs. Hodge straightened an already straight cushion. Tea will be brought. Try not to wander. The house is large. Easy to get lost. Then she was gone, and Eliza was alone. She didn't sit. Couldn't. Energy buzzed under her skin. Nervous, frightened energy that needed an outlet. She moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal grounds that had once been magnificent. You could see the ghost of it. Overgrown parterres, a fountain choked with weeds, pathways disappearing into untamed hedgerows. Beyond, in the distance, she could make out what might have been a conservatory, glass panels catching the weak afternoon light, all of it dying, neglected, forgotten. The door opened without warning. Eliza spun, heart hammering, and there he was. Adrian Blackmore. She'd seen him only twice before. Once at a distance during the negotiations, where he'd appeared in her father's study like a dark angel, all sharp angles and barely contained power, staying just long enough to review papers and leave. Once at the wedding that morning, where he'd spoken vows in a voice that could have been reciting a shipping manifest. Now, up close, the impact was physical. He was tall, broad-shouldered. Features carved from some stern template that had no patience for softness. a hard jaw, storm gray eyes that tracked over her with the warmth of a tax assessor. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, despite him being perhaps 35. He wore riding clothes, still dusted with road dirt, and smelled of horse and rain and something else. Something cold. "You're here." Not a greeting, a statement of fact. "Yes." Eliza fought to keep her voice level. "I'm here." "Good." He moved past her to a sideboard, poured whiskey without offering her any. "We should establish expectations immediately. Saves confusion later." Her stomach nodded. "Of course." He drank, studying her over the rim of the glass. "This marriage serves a purpose. My estate requires an heir. Your family required financial intervention. Those needs are now aligned. Beyond that," he gestured vaguely, as if the rest was too insignificant to articulate. "Beyond that, we need not pretend affection." The words landed like stones in still water. Eliza had known this, obviously, had understood the arrangement from the beginning, but hearing it spoken so baldly, with such casual dismissal, carved something hollow in her chest. "I see," she managed. "Do you?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "I wonder. You look the romantic sort. Books and daydreams. Let me be clear, madam. I don't require a companion. I require a duchess capable of managing a household, producing an heir, and not making herself a nuisance. Can you do that?" Something hot flared behind her ribs. Pride, maybe. Or an anger. "I managed my father's entire estate for 6 years while he drank himself into debt. I'm quite capable of not being a nuisance, Your Grace." His eyebrow lifted a fraction. "Did you?" "Yes." She lifted her chin. "Someone had to keep the creditors at bay while my family burned through what remained of our fortune. I'm not asking for affection, but I won't be spoken to like a child either." Silence stretched between them, charged with something Eliza couldn't quite name. Adrian's expression didn't change, but she had the sudden sense of being reassessed, measured. "Good," he said finally. "Then we understand each other. Mrs. Hodge will show you to your rooms. Dinner is at 8. Don't be late." He turned to leave. "Wait." The word escaped before she could stop it. He paused, not quite looking back. "Is that all?" Eliza's hands were shaking. She gripped them together to still the tremor. "We're married. I've left everything I knew." "And that's all you have to say?" For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered across his face. Something that might have been regret, or weariness, or pain so old it had calcified into indifference. Then it was gone. "What else would you have me say?" His voice was quiet now, quieter than before. "That I'll cherish you. That this is a love match. We both know better. You came here for security. I needed a wife. It's done. Everything else is unnecessary ornament." Unnecessary. She repeated the word like it was foreign. "You mean feeling, kindness, basic human—" "I mean complications." He cut her off, finally turning to face her fully. "I buried one wife already, Miss Whitmore. I have no intention of—" He stopped, jaw tight. "You have security, a title, wealth. That's more than most women of your station could hope for. Be content with it." Then he was gone, door closing with a finality that echoed through the empty room. Eliza stood frozen, her wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume, like she was playing a part in a theatrical production where no one had given her the script. The tea came. She didn't drink it. Mrs. Hodge returned an hour later to show her upstairs, a silent procession through corridors that smelled of dust and disuse, past closed doors and empty rooms, until they reached the Duchess's chambers. "Your rooms, Your Grace." Mrs. Hodge pushed open the door to reveal a suite that was, like everything else in this house, technically magnificent and emotionally barren. A 4-poster bed, heavy drapes, furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. "His Grace's chambers are through there." She indicated an adjoining door. "He prefers to dress for dinner. You should do the same." Eliza barely registered the words. She was staring at the bed, massive, cold, pristine, and thinking about the wedding night still to come. "Will he—" She swallowed. "Should I expect—" Mrs. Hodge's expression softened a fraction. Just a fraction. His Grace conducts his marital duties with efficiency, Your Grace. I suggest you prepare yourself mentally. It will be brief. Brief. As if it were a business meeting. Maybe it was. When Mrs. Hodge left, Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed and let herself shake. Really shake. She'd been holding it together through sheer force of will, through the wedding, the endless carriage ride, the brutal conversation downstairs. But now, alone, the reality crashed over her in waves. She was married to a stranger who'd made it abundantly clear she was nothing more than a means to an end. A stranger who would come through that adjoining door tonight and… No. She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. No, I won't fall apart. I won't. She'd survived her father's disappointment, her mother's death, Caroline's endless stream of suitors who looked through Eliza like she was furniture. She'd kept an estate running on vapor and prayer while everyone around her pretended not to notice the walls were crumbling. She could survive this too. But as she moved to the window, another view of dying gardens and encroaching wilderness, a different thought emerged. What if survival isn't enough? Dinner was an exercise in silence. They sat at opposite ends of a table built for 20, separated by an expanse of polished mahogany and silver candelabra. Adrian ate with mechanical precision, his attention on papers he'd brought to the table. Eliza picked at roasted pheasant and tried not to feel like a ghost. The estate seems quite large, she ventured finally, desperate to fill the void with something, anything. 8,000 acres. He didn't look up. Productive acreage has declined. Tenancies are down. That will be addressed. Perhaps I could… Mrs. Hodge manages the household. You needn't concern yourself with estate business. I only thought… Your thoughts on the matter aren't required. The words were delivered without heat, which somehow made them worse. She was being dismissed. Again. Flattened into irrelevance before she'd even tried to establish herself. Eliza set down her fork carefully. I see. Silence reclaimed the room. When the meal ended, Adrian stood. I have work to finish. Mrs. Hodge will see you upstairs. Of course. She kept her voice neutral. Shall I… That is, should I expect… His expression closed. Give me an hour. Then he was gone again, and Eliza was left sitting at a table set for a feast, utterly alone. Mrs. Hodge helped her undress with efficient, impersonal hands. The nightgown laid out was white linen, high-necked and practical. Nothing romantic about it. Nothing designed to please. Into bed, Your Grace. When His Grace comes, it's best to simply allow things to proceed. Eliza's cheeks burned. I'm not a child. I understand the mechanics. Of course, Mrs. Hodge's tone suggested otherwise. Nevertheless, efficiency is appreciated. His Grace dislikes fuss. Fuss. As if expressing any emotion during intimacy was an inconvenience. Alone again, Eliza climbed into bed and pulled the covers to her chin. The room was too large, too cold. The fire in the hearth did nothing to warm it. She lay rigid, staring at the canopy overhead, and waited. The adjoining door opened precisely 1 hour after dinner had ended. Adrian entered wearing a dressing gown, his expression as unreadable as ever. He closed the door behind him, moved to the bedside, and stood looking down at her with something that might have been reluctance. I'll try not to hurt you, he said finally. Formal, like issuing orders to staff. But this is necessary. Necessary. Not desired. Not even wanted. Just necessary. Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. What followed was exactly as Mrs. Hodge had described, brief, efficient, utterly devoid of tenderness. Adrian approached it like a task to be completed, which she supposed it was. He was careful enough not to cause pain, but there was no warmth in it, no connection. When he finished, he withdrew immediately, redoing his dressing gown with businesslike precision. Are you hurt? No. Her voice came out hoarse. Good. He moved toward the adjoining door, paused. This will repeat as needed until you're with child. After that, I'll leave you in peace. Peace, as if his absence was a gift. I understand, Eliza whispered, He looked at her one last time, something complicated moving behind those storm-gray eyes. Then, "Good night, Miss Whitmore." Not your Grace, not Eliza, Miss Whitmore. As if they were still strangers who'd just concluded a business arrangement, which she realized with a hollow ache was exactly what they were. The door closed. Eliza lay in the dark, staring at nothing, and felt something inside her harden. She'd come here believing she could endure, could make herself small and quiet and unobtrusive, trading dignity for security like her father had taught her. But lying in this cold bed, in this dying house, after being used and dismissed like a convenient object. No. The word formed somewhere deep, somewhere she hadn't known existed until this moment. No. I won't just endure. I won't fade away. She didn't know what that meant yet. Didn't have a plan. But as she turned onto her side and pulled the covers close, something shifted in her chest. Something that felt almost like defiance. This marriage was a prison. But Eliza Blackmore, because that was her name now, whether Adrian acknowledged it or not, had never been good at accepting cages. And somewhere in the darkness beyond her window, the dying gardens waited. Morning came gray and cold. Eliza woke to find herself alone. Adrian's side of the bed, if you could call it that, untouched, as if he'd never been there at all. For a moment, she wondered if last night had been some fever dream. Then she moved, felt the residual ache between her thighs, and knew. Real. All of it. She dressed herself, refusing to ring for help. The wardrobe held gowns clearly chosen by someone else, Mrs. Hodge probably, all in somber colors. Grays, dark blues, nothing frivolous. She chose a practical wool dress in slate blue and braided her own hair, fingers moving through the familiar motions while her mind raced elsewhere. Breakfast was set in a smaller dining room, mercifully. Adrian was already there, reading correspondence and drinking coffee. He glanced up when she entered, nodded once, and returned to his papers. No good morning. No acknowledgement of the previous night. Just silence. Eliza served herself from the sideboard, eggs, toast, tea, and ate. The food tasted like ash, but she forced it down anyway. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fade. "I'd like to tour the grounds today," she said into the quiet. Adrian's eyes flicked up. Why? Not why. With curiosity, just why, flat and suspicious. "Because this is my home now. I should know it. Mrs. Hodge can show you the house." "I meant the gardens, the estate." "The estate is managed. You needn't—" "I know I needn't." She set her teacup down with more force than intended. "But I'd like to, unless that's forbidden." Something sparked in his expression, surprise maybe that she'd pushed back. "Do as you like, just don't interfere with the staff." "I won't interfere. I'll simply look." He returned to his correspondence, clearly done with the conversation. Fine. What? The grounds were worse than she'd realized. Mrs. Hodge had provided a cloak and directions. "Stay on the paths, Your Grace. Some areas are quite overgrown." But nothing could have prepared Eliza for the scale of neglect. The formal gardens closest to the house were dying slowly, box hedges overgrown into monstrous shapes, flower beds choked with weeds, statuary green with moss. It had clearly been magnificent once. You could see the bones of it, the design lurking under years of abandonment, but now it looked like a corpse. She walked deeper, following cracked stone paths that led toward the conservatory she'd glimpsed from the drawing room. The building loomed ahead, glass panels clouded with grime and algae, many cracked or missing entirely. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside was a jungle. Plants had escaped their beds and gone wild, climbing, choking, overwhelming everything. Some were dead, brown skeletons amid the green chaos. Others thrived in the humid darkness, twining around rusted supports and broken benches. The air smelled of rot and growth in equal measure, fecund and overwhelming. "Jesus," Eliza breathed. "No one comes here anymore." She spun, heart leaping. A man stood in the doorway, old, weathered, dressed in gardener's clothes that had seen better decades. He leaned on a spade and regarded her with rheumy but shrewd eyes. "I'm Barnaby, Your Grace, head gardener, or was before." He gestured vaguely at the ruin surrounding them. Well, before? Before her grace died. He moved into the conservatory, navigating the chaos with familiar ease. She loved this place, spent hours here. After, he trailed off, shaking his head. His grace wouldn't set foot in it, wouldn't let anyone maintain it proper, said to let it die. Eliza's chest tightened. Why? Barnaby gave her a look that said she should know better than to ask. Grief does strange things to men, your grace. Some men lock up what hurts. His grace locked up everything. She turned slowly, taking in the scope of the destruction. This could be saved, couldn't it? Could be. Barnaby's tone was carefully neutral. If someone wanted it saved, if someone had the will to fight for it. And money? And staff? His grace has both. What he lacks is, Barnaby tapped his chest. Heart for it. Been that way 10 years now. Eliza moved deeper into the conservatory, pushing aside vines to reveal a bench beneath. She sat, heedless of the dirt. What was she like? The first Duchess? Kind. The word came quick, certain. Too kind for this place, some said. Too soft. But she tried to bring warmth here. Light. He gestured around. This was her heart. When she died, he buried her twice, Eliza finished quietly. Once in the ground, once here. Aye. They sat in companionable silence, the ruin breathing around them. Could it be done? Eliza asked finally. Truly. If someone wanted to try. Barnaby studied her with those sharp old eyes. You thinking of trying, your grace? I don't know. She touched a trailing vine, leaves soft under her fingers. Maybe. Would you help? If I did? I'm an old man, not much use for heavy labor. But you know this place. You knew her vision. Aye. He smiled, just slightly. I knew it. Then teach me. The words came sure, surprising even herself. Teach me what she wanted, what this could be. Barnaby was quiet for a long moment. Then, His Grace won't like it. His Grace doesn't like anything. Eliza stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. But he told me to do as I liked, so I will. Walking back to the manor, Eliza felt something unfamiliar warming her chest. Purpose. For the first time since arriving, she had something to fight for. And if Adrian didn't like it? Well, he'd made it clear she was on her own. Time to show him what that actually meant. The first week passed in a strange kind of limbo. Adrian kept to his routines. Early rides across the estate, hours locked in his study, dinners consumed in silence. He came to her bed 3 more times, each encounter as perfunctory as the first. He never stayed, never spoke beyond the bare minimum, and each time he left, Eliza felt a little more of herself calcify into something harder. Good. Hard was useful. During the days, she explored. The manor had 47 rooms by her count, most closed off and sheeted in dust. The staff numbered 12, though half of them seemed to exist in a permanent state of nervous avoidance, scurrying away when she approached, answering questions in monosyllables. Only Barnaby and, surprisingly, a young maid named Tessie showed any willingness to engage. They're afraid, Tessie explained one morning while helping Eliza navigate the labyrinth of servants' passages. She was maybe 18, all freckles and nervous energy. Mrs. Hodge runs things strict-like. And His Grace, she lowered her voice, he don't tolerate mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Any kind, your Grace. Last housemaid broke a vase. He had her dismissed that same day. Didn't even let her pack proper. Eliza absorbed this, adding it to her growing understanding of her husband. Control. That's what drove him. Absolute control over every aspect of his domain, maintained through fear and distance. Well, she had no intention of breaking vases, but she had every intention of bringing the conservatory back to life. She started small. Barnaby was too old for heavy labor, but his knowledge was encyclopedic. Together, they cataloged what remained, which plants could be saved, which were too far gone, what the structure itself needed. The list grew longer each day. New glass panels, replacement support, soil amendments, drainage repairs, actual staff willing to work. It'll take months, Barnaby warned. And a fair bit of coin. I have some. Her dowry, what remained of it. Not much, but enough to start. We'll make it work. They began with clearing. Eliza worked alongside Barnaby and Tessie, who'd volunteered shyly, saying she missed having flowers in the house. It was brutal work, hauling dead plants, scrubbing algae from glass, digging out roots that had cracked the floor tiles. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. She'd never been so tired. She'd also never felt more alive. Your Grace, you're bleeding. Tessie pointed to Eliza's palm where a thorn had gouged deep. It's fine. Eliza wrapped it in her handkerchief and kept working. Just don't mention it to Mrs. Hodge. Too late. That evening, Mrs. Hodge appeared in Eliza's chambers with a first aid kit and a disapproving scowl. His Grace has been informed you've been laboring in the conservatory like common staff. Eliza's stomach dropped. I see. He wishes to speak with you after dinner. Of course he did. Dinner was the same silent affair. Adrian at one end, her at the other, miles of polished wood between them. But tonight, she could feel his attention on her like a physical weight. When the plates were cleared, he didn't leave. Come with me. Not a request. She followed him to his study, a room she hadn't yet entered. It was exactly as she'd imagined. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with books that looked decorative rather than read. A massive desk dominated the space, covered in ledgers and correspondence. He gestured to a chair. Sit. She sat. Adrian remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. Mrs. Hodge informs me you've been spending your days in the conservatory. Yes. Doing manual labor. Yes. His jaw tightened. That's unacceptable. Why? Because you're a duchess. You have a position to maintain. A position. Eliza folded her hands in her lap, ignoring the sting from her bandaged palm. You mean I should sit in the drawing room and embroider while your estate crumbles around me? The estate is not crumbling. It's managed. Really? She leaned forward. Have you actually looked at the grounds? The gardens are dying. The conservatory is a ruin. The tenant cottages I passed yesterday have holes in their roofs. Your management is letting everything rot. Color rose in his cheeks, the first real emotion she'd seen from him beyond cold dismissal. You've been here a week. You know nothing about running an estate of this size. I know neglect when I see it. The words came sharp, fueled by a week of silence and dismissal. And I know the difference between management and avoidance. Careful. Or what? You'll send me away? She stood, matching his intensity. We both know you need me here. For your heir. So unless you plan to terminate our arrangement, I suggest you let me do something productive with my time. They stared at each other across the desk. Adrian's expression was thunderous, but underneath she saw something else. Surprise, maybe, or the faintest flicker of respect. The conservatory was my late wife's project, he said finally. Low, dangerous. I want it left alone. Then it'll die completely. Is that what you want? Her memory rotting away because you're too... She stopped, biting back words she couldn't unsay. Too what? He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. Say it. Too afraid. She held her ground. Too afraid to face anything that reminds you she existed. His hand slammed down on the desk. The crack echoed like a gunshot. You know nothing about my wife, about what I lost. You're right. I don't. Eliza's voice dropped, steadier now. But I know what I see. A beautiful place being destroyed by grief, and I won't sit idle and watch it happen. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do. She lifted her chin. You said I could do as I liked, remember? You said not to be a nuisance. Well, I'm not being one. I'm fixing what's broken. If you don't like it, then you should have married someone willing to fade into the wallpaper. Silence crashed between them. Adrian's breathing was harsh. His hands gripped the desk edge so hard his knuckles went white. For a moment, Eliza thought he might actually shout, might unleash whatever he kept locked so tightly behind that cold facade. Instead, he turned away. Do what you want. The words came out flat, defeated. Just stay out of my sight while you do it. Gladly. She left before he could see her hands shaking. Back in her chambers, Eliza sank onto the bed and let the adrenaline drain. She'd pushed, hard, harder than was probably wise. But the alternative, accepting his dismissal, his control, his cold determination to keep her locked in the role of silent, obedient wife. No. She'd meant what she said. She wouldn't fade, even if it meant war. Over the following days, something shifted in the household. Adrian avoided her completely. No more dinners together, no more visits to her bed. He communicated through Mrs. Hodge when necessary, and otherwise treated Eliza like she'd ceased to exist. Fine. She'd been invisible her whole life. She knew how to work with it. But the staff noticed. Tessie reported whispered conversations in the kitchens. Her Grace stood up to him proper. Didn't back down, not even when he shouted. It spread like wildfire, this idea that the quiet Duchess had teeth. Not everyone approved. Mrs. Hodge's disapproval intensified into active obstruction. Supplies Eliza ordered went missing. Workers she'd hired were mysteriously reassigned. When Eliza confronted her, the housekeeper's smile was ice. "I'm sure it's simply confusion, Your Grace. With His Grace managing estate affairs, there's bound to be overlap." "This isn't overlap, this is sabotage." "Strong words." Mrs. Hodge smoothed her apron. "Perhaps you should discuss it with His Grace, if he's willing to speak with you." The implication was clear. "You've burned that bridge. You're on your own." Eliza gritted her teeth and worked around it. She paid for materials out of her own rapidly dwindling funds. She recruited workers from the village directly, offering fair wages and decent treatment, radical concepts apparently given how eagerly they signed on. And slowly, painfully, the conservatory began to transform. 3 weeks in, the first real crisis hit. Eliza was in the conservatory helping install new glass panels when Barnaby appeared at a run, an alarming sight given his age and usual measured pace. "Your Grace, the North Tenant Row, there's been a collapse." Her blood went cold. "What kind of collapse?" "Roof cave-in, the Mitchell's cottage. They're saying—" He caught his breath, face gray. "They're saying someone's trapped inside." She was moving before he finished, hiking her skirts and running across the grounds toward the tenant village. Behind her, she heard Tessie calling for help, but Eliza didn't stop. The Mitchells? She'd met them during her explorations. Young couple. 3 children. Please. Not the children. The scene was chaos. A crowd had gathered around a cottage whose roof had indeed collapsed. Thatch and timber caved inward in a sickening heap. People were shouting, trying to clear debris with bare hands, but the wreckage was massive. "Who's inside?" Eliza grabbed the nearest man. "Thomas, one of the grooms." "Mrs. Mitchell and the baby, Your Grace. They were upstairs when it went. Mr. Mitchell and the older children were out in the fields." "Upstairs. Under all that." "Has anyone sent for His Grace?" "Aye, but he's in the village. Won't be back for an hour at least." An hour. They didn't have an hour. Eliza pushed forward, assessing the damage with the same analytical eye she'd used on estate accounts. The collapse was worst at the center, where the old beams had finally given way to rot and weather, but the edges might still be stable. "We need to clear from the sides inward," she called out. "Carefully. If we shift the wrong piece, the whole thing could come down further. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but we should wait for—" "There's a woman and baby under there." Eliza grabbed a timber and started pulling. "We're not waiting." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Thomas stepped up beside her. "Right. You heard Her Grace. From the sides. Carefully." They worked. It was delicate, terrifying work. Every piece removed could trigger another collapse. Eliza's mind raced, calculating load-bearing points, trying to remember everything she'd learned helping her father's estate manager repair storm damage years ago. Her hands were bleeding again. She didn't care. "There!" Someone spotted movement in the wreckage. "I see her!" They redoubled efforts, clearing enough debris to reveal Mrs. Mitchell, covered in dust, bleeding from a gash on her forehead, but conscious. And in her arms, wailing but alive, the baby. The crowd erupted in cheers. Getting them out took another 20 minutes of careful extraction. By the time Mrs. Mitchell and her child were free, both being tended by the village healer, Eliza was shaking with exhaustion and relief. Your Grace, Thomas approached, cap in hand. That was, we couldn't have done it without you directing things. You saved them. We all did. She looked around at the assembled tenants, people who'd stopped work to help, who'd trusted her judgment even though she was an outsider, an aristocrat, everything they should have distrusted. We did it together. Still, he smiled. His Grace should know what you did. His Grace will know it needed doing in the first place. The words came out harder than intended. Eliza looked at the ruined cottage, then at the row of others in similar disrepair. How long has this row been in this condition? Uncomfortable silence. 2 years, someone finally admitted. We've asked for repairs. Keep getting told there's no budget. No budget. While the manor sat full of silver and artwork and unused rooms. Something hot and fierce ignited in Eliza's chest. That's going to change, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm going to make sure of it. She meant it as a promise. She didn't realize it was a declaration of war. Adrian returned at dusk. Eliza was in the drawing room, still filthy from the rescue, trying to wash dried blood from her hands when he appeared in the doorway. He took in her appearance, torn dress, disheveled hair, the cut on her cheek she hadn't realized she'd gotten, and his expression went very still. What happened? Not a question, a demand. There was a roof collapse. Tenant Rowe, Mrs. Mitchell, and her baby were trapped. I heard. He stepped closer, eyes scanning her for injuries. Mrs. Hodge said you were there, that you directed the rescue. Someone had to. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. She met his gaze steadily. They're safe. That's what matters. What matters? He bit off the words, jaw clenching. You're a duchess, not a rescue worker. You had no business. I had every business. The words exploded out of her. Those are your tenants, your responsibility, and they're living in hovels that are literally collapsing around them while you hide in your study and pretend everything's fine. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? She stood, ignoring the way her legs trembled. I've walked this estate, Adrian. I've seen the cottages. The fields going fallow because families are leaving for work elsewhere. The village school with holes in the roof. The mill that's been broken for God knows how long. You talk about management, but what you really mean is willful blindness. His face had gone white. Careful. No, I'm done being careful. She was shaking now, but not with fear, with fury. You brought me here to be your convenient broodmare and household ornament. Fine. But you don't get to tell me to sit silent while people suffer because you're too paralyzed by grief to actually lead. How dare you? How dare you? She threw the words back at him. You have wealth, power, influence, and you use it for nothing. You've turned this estate into a mausoleum for your dead wife while the living barely survive. Is that what she would have wanted? The slap came from nowhere, not physical. Adrian didn't touch her. But the words did, sharp and vicious. You know nothing about what she wanted. You're not fit to speak her name. Eliza recoiled as if he'd actually struck her. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, the space between them crackling with something dangerous and raw. You're right, she said finally, quietly. I didn't know her, but I know this. If you loved her even a fraction as much as you claim, you wouldn't let her legacy rot. You'd honor it by caring for what she cared about. She turned and left before he could respond. In her chambers, alone, Eliza finally let herself cry. Not from hurt, though his words had cut deep. Not from exhaustion, though she was bone-tired. From frustration. From the soul-deep unfairness of being trapped in a marriage where she was simultaneously invisible and blamed, needed and dismissed, expected to produce an heir for a man who wouldn't even look at her. She cried until there were no tears left. Then she washed her face, bandaged her hands properly, and made a decision. If Adrian wouldn't act, she would, whatever the cost. The next morning, she requested a meeting with the estate manager, a nervous man named Mr. Pemberton, who looked like he'd rather face a firing squad than an angry duchess. I want a full accounting, Eliza said crisply. Income, expenses, maintenance budgets, tenant rents, everything. Your Grace, His Grace handles all financial. His Grace isn't here. I am. She leaned forward. Mr. Pemberton, I saw the tenant row. I saw Mrs. Mitchell nearly die because a roof that should have been repaired years ago was left to rot. I want to know why. He squirmed. There have been priority shifts. His Grace redirected funds to other investments, more profitable ventures. More profitable than keeping roofs over people's heads? Your Grace, I only implement decisions. I don't make them. She softened slightly. I know. I'm not blaming you, but I need the truth. Can this estate afford repairs, or is it truly in financial difficulty? Pemberton hesitated. Then slowly, he pulled out a ledger. What he showed her made Eliza's blood boil. The estate wasn't struggling. It was profitable, remarkably so. Rents came in regularly. The productive acreage, while reduced, still generated significant income. But the funds were being redirected into investments, into accounts Pemberton could only describe as His Grace's private ventures. Meanwhile, maintenance budgets had been slashed to nearly nothing. He's hoarding, Eliza breathed. He's sitting on wealth while his people suffer. Your Grace, I wouldn't characterize How would you characterize it? Pemberton closed the ledger carefully. I would say His Grace has become risk-averse. After the late Duchess's death, he began consolidating, protecting, ensuring the estate could survive any future crisis. By creating a present one. Silence. Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. Eliza stood. I'd like copies of these ledgers. Can you arrange that? Your Grace, if His Grace discovers... Let me worry about His Grace. She spent the afternoon studying the numbers, her anger crystallizing into something harder. Something like purpose. Adrian had wealth. He was choosing not to use it, choosing to let people suffer rather than risk his carefully controlled world. Well, Eliza had a little wealth of her own. Not much, but enough to make a statement. That evening she visited the village. The Mitchells first, to check on Mrs. Mitchell's recovery and leave enough coin to cover medical expenses and temporary housing while their cottage was rebuilt. Then she moved systematically through the tenant row, cataloging damage, promising repairs, leaving small sums to tide families over. Your Grace, you don't have to... Mr. Mitchell started. I know. Eliza smiled. But I want to. You're part of this estate. That means you matter. Word spread fast. By the time she returned to the manor, her purse was significantly lighter and her heart significantly fuller. She also knew there would be consequences. They came at dinner. Adrian appeared in the dining room as she sat down. The first time in a week he'd joined her for a meal. His expression was carved from ice. You've been busy. Yes. Visiting tenants, distributing charity, making promises about repairs. Not charity, investment. She met his gaze. And not promises. Commitments. Using what funds? Mine. His laugh was bitter. Your dowry. That pittance won't repair a single cottage properly, let alone the entire row. Then I'll find more funds. How? By begging me? He leaned forward. Let me be clear, madam. I won't be manipulated into spending based on your sentimental notions about tenant welfare. Sentimental? Eliza's voice dropped to something dangerous. A woman and baby nearly died. That's not sentiment, that's reality. A reality that's been managed for years without your interference. Managed? You call letting buildings collapse management? I call it acceptable loss in service of long-term stability. The words hung in the air like a confession. Eliza stared at him. Acceptable loss? You're talking about human lives. I'm talking about survival. Adrian's mask was cracking, something desperate bleeding through. You think you understand this estate? You've been here a month. I've bled for this place. Watched it nearly fall apart after... He stopped, turned away. You don't know what it takes to keep everything from collapsing completely. Then tell me. She stood, moving around the table. Adrian, tell me what you're so afraid of. I'm not afraid. You're terrified. Closer now, close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw. Of loss. Of caring. Of anything that might crack that armor you've built. Don't presume, I'm not presuming, I'm seeing. She reached out, almost touched his arm, then dropped her hand. You think control equals safety, that if you manage everything perfectly, nothing can hurt you. But it's killing you, and this estate, and everyone in it. For a moment, just a heartbeat, his facade crumbled. She saw raw pain in his eyes, grief so profound it took her breath away. Then it was gone. Shuddered behind ice again. Get out! Adrian, out! He grabbed a glass, hurled it against the wall. It shattered, shards raining down like tears. Get out of my sight! Eliza fled. Behind her she heard another crash, then another, the sounds of something breaking that had been held too tightly for too long. She made it to her chambers before her own composure shattered. But even as she sank to the floor, back against the door, one thought burned through the chaos. I'm not giving up. Not on this estate. Not on those people. Not even on him. The next morning brought the storm, literally. Eliza woke to wind howling against the windows and rain drumming on the roof. The sky was bruised purple, clouds roiling like something alive. Servants rushed through hallways, securing shutters, moving valuable items away from windows. Your Grace, Tessie appeared white-faced. Mrs. Hodge says to stay inside, says it's going to be bad. It was worse than bad. By afternoon, the storm was a living thing, wind tearing at the manor, rain coming sideways in sheets. Eliza stood at the window of her chambers, watching trees bend nearly double, and thought of the conservatory. All that new glass. The repairs barely finished. No, she breathed. She was out the door before thinking it through. The grounds were chaos. Debris flying, paths turned to rivers, the world reduced to gray and wind and water. Eliza ran anyway, half blind, skirts plastered to her legs. Behind her she heard shouting. Barnaby? Tessie? But the storm swallowed the words. The conservatory loomed ahead, glass panels rattling in their frames. Then one shattered, then another. No! She reached the door, wrenched it open against the wind. Inside was carnage, plants whipping in the gale, blowing through broken panels, water pouring in, everything they'd worked for being destroyed in real time. A support beam groaned above her. Eliza looked up just as it gave way. Someone slammed into her from the side, driving her out of the path as the beam crashed down where she'd been standing. She hit the ground hard, all the air knocked from her lungs. Strong hands dragged her upright, pulled her toward the door. Are you insane? Adrian's voice cut through the roar. You could have been killed. The conservatory is not worth your life. He hauled her outside, both of them immediately drenched. Move! Another groan from inside. Then, with a sound like the world ending, part of the roof caved in. Adrian didn't stop. He half carried, half dragged her back toward the manor, both of them fighting the wind. By the time they reached the entrance, Eliza was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Inside, dripping on marble floors, they stared at each other. What were you thinking? Adrian demanded. I was thinking... She coughed, lungs still struggling. I was thinking about everything we'd built. Everything I'd... Her voice broke. It's gone. All of it. It's glass and plants. It was her dream. The words ripped out of her. It was the one beautiful thing in this whole dying place, and I destroyed it. You didn't destroy anything. The storm. I insisted on the repairs. I pushed for new glass. If I just left it alone like you said, then it would have collapsed months ago anyway. His hands were on her shoulders now, gripping hard. Eliza, listen to me. This isn't your fault. She was crying. When had she started crying? I wanted to fix something, she whispered. Just one thing. I wanted to make something beautiful. Adrian's expression did something complicated. His hands loosened slightly on her shoulders, became almost gentle. You did, he said quietly. For a while you did. They stood there, water pooling around them, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Eliza felt like he actually saw her, not as a duchess, not as a duty, as a person who'd tried and failed and bled for something she believed in. I'm sorry, he said, even quieter now. For what I said last night, you didn't deserve that. I shouldn't have. No, you were right. He released her shoulders, stepped back. About all of it. I have been hiding, from grief, from responsibility, from... He gestured vaguely. Everything. Eliza wiped her eyes. Adrian, the conservatory can be rebuilt, properly this time. He looked at her, something raw and real in his expression. If you want to, I'll fund it. And the tenant repairs. All of it. She stared. Why? Because watching you run into a storm for a building full of plants made me realize. He trailed off, looked away. Made me realize I haven't cared about anything that much in 10 years. And maybe it's time I started trying again. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something shifted. Okay, Eliza said softly. We'll rebuild it, together. For the first time since their wedding, Adrian smiled. It was small, brief, but it was real. For the first time since their wedding, Adrian smiled. It was small, brief, but it was real. And it terrified Eliza more than his coldness ever had. Because hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable. And she'd spent too many years learning that vulnerability led to disappointment, that opening yourself up only gave people better angles to hurt you. But standing there in the entrance hall, both of them dripping and breathless, something had shifted. The wall between them had developed a crack. She just didn't know if that would save them or destroy them both. The storm raged for 2 more days. When it finally passed, the damage was catastrophic. The conservatory was a skeleton, half the roof gone, glass everywhere, most of the plants either dead or dying. 3 tenant cottages had lost roofs entirely. The mill's water wheel had been torn from its moorings. Fences were down across half the estate, livestock scattered, fields flooded. Adrian surveyed it all with an expression Eliza couldn't quite read. We'll need workers, he said finally. A lot of them. And materials. The nearest timber yard is in Ashford, but they'll be overwhelmed with orders after this. What about the London suppliers you use for the manor? He glanced at her, something like surprise in his eyes. You've been paying attention. I've been reading Mr. Pemberton's ledgers. She picked her way through debris in what had been the formal gardens. You have accounts with 3 major suppliers. Surely one of them would charge triple for emergency orders. Yes, he sighed. But you're right. We don't have much choice. They worked side by side over the following week, and it was strange. Eliza had expected Adrian to take over, to push her aside now that he'd decided to engage. Instead, he sought her input, asked her opinions, actually listened when she suggested alternative approaches. It wasn't partnership, not yet, but it was something. The estate hummed with activity. Workers arrived from the village and beyond. Carpenters, masons, glaziers. The tenant cottages got priority, Adrian's orders. Then the mill. The conservatory would come last. Your late wife's project should come first, Eliza said one evening as they reviewed plans in his study. No. Adrian's tone brooked no argument. People before plants. That's what you taught me, remember? She did remember. And something warm unfurled in her chest at hearing her own words reflected back. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Mrs. Hodges' displeasure had graduated from passive-aggressive to openly hostile. Supplies went missing again. Workers reported being told to slow down, that her grace was overreaching her authority. When Eliza confronted her, the housekeeper's smile was venomous. I serve his grace, your grace, not upstart women who fancy themselves estate managers. I don't fancy myself anything. I'm trying to help. Help? Mrs. Hodge laughed. You've spent a fortune on repairs we don't need, disrupted decades of established protocol, and turned His Grace's attention from proper management to your projects. That's not help. That's chaos. Eliza felt her temper rising. The proper management you're referring to left people homeless and starving while money sat in accounts doing nothing. If that's protocol, then protocol needs to change. You don't belong here. The words were quiet, deadly. You're a temporary inconvenience. Once you've produced an heir, His Grace will remember that. And then all this, she gestured dismissively. All this will stop. The words hit like physical blows, because part of Eliza feared they were true. She said nothing to Adrian about it. What could she say? Your housekeeper hates me and thinks I'm temporary? He'd probably agree. Despite the thaw between them, he still hadn't returned to her bed. Still kept his distance outside of estate business. The smile had been real, but it had also been an anomaly. She was still just a means to an end. That truth burned like acid. 3 weeks after the storm, a letter arrived that changed everything. Eliza was in the conservatory ruins, helping Barnaby salvage what plants could still be saved, when Tessie came running. "Your Grace, His Grace needs you, in his study. Says it's urgent." Her stomach dropped. Urgent was never good. She found Adrian standing at his desk, a letter in hand, his face ashen. "What's wrong?" He looked up, and the expression in his eyes made her go cold. "We're ruined." "What?" He handed her the letter. It was from a London bank, formal, impersonal, devastating. The investments Adrian had poured estate funds into, those secure ventures meant to protect against future crisis, had collapsed. A scandal involving the investment company. Fraud. The principals had fled the country. Every penny was gone. "How much?" Eliza's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Everything." Adrian sank into his chair. 15 years of profits, the emergency reserves, the tenant improvement funds, all of it. Gone. She read the letter again, hoping she'd misunderstood. She hadn't. "What about the estate accounts? The regular operating funds?" "Enough to cover 6 months, maybe. After that," he gestured helplessly. "We'll have to sell land, artwork, maybe the manor itself." Eliza's mind raced. "The London house?" "Mortgaged. I took a loan against it last year to increase the investments." His laugh was broken. "I was trying to be smart, trying to ensure we'd never be vulnerable. And instead, I've destroyed everything." She watched him crumble, this man who'd been so rigidly controlled, and felt her heart break for him. But there was no time for comfort. They needed solutions. "We'll find a way," she said firmly. "How? We can't even complete the repairs we've started. The workers—" He stopped, swallowed. "I'll have to dismiss them, today, before the debts pile higher." "No? Eliza, we can't afford—" "I know what we can't afford." She paced, thinking. "But if we stop now, we lose everything anyway. The tenants will leave. The productive acreage will decline further. We'll enter a death spiral. We're already in one. Then we fight our way out." She turned to face him. "What assets do we have that aren't mortgaged or lost?" "Nothing. I've leveraged everything. There has to be something. The artwork, the silver, would sell for a fraction of their value in a forced sale, and even then it's not enough." Eliza's mind worked furiously. There had to be an answer, had to be something they could— "Wait. The tenant rents," she said slowly. "They're due next month, yes?" "Yes, but that's barely £200. It won't make a dent." "What if we forgave them?" Adrian stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Forgave? We need that money. We need the tenants more." She moved to the desk, pulling out the ledgers she'd been studying. "Look, half the cottages are empty because families left for work elsewhere. The ones who remain are barely scraping by. If we forgive this quarter's rent and use what emergency funds we have to finish their repairs, actually finish them, we create loyalty, stability. We also create insolvency. We create investment." She flipped pages, showing him her calculations. "These families have skills, trade knowledge. If they stay, they work the land, produce crops, generate actual income instead of sitting on empty fields. And word spreads. Blackmore takes care of its people. We attract new tenants, good ones. Within a year—" "We don't have a year." Adrian slammed the ledger shut. "We have months before the creditors come calling. Your plan is insane. Your plan is surrender." They glared at each other across the desk. "I'm trying to save what we can," Adrian said finally. Low, defeated. "You're proposing we throw away our last resources on a gamble. I'm proposing we invest in people instead of hiding behind walls waiting to die." Eliza's voice shook. "You've been so afraid of loss that you've forgotten how to fight for anything. Well, I haven't, and I won't let this estate fall without trying." "It's not your decision to make." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Eliza felt something inside her go very still. "I see." "Eliza, no, you're right." She stepped back. I'm just the wife, the temporary inconvenience who will be dismissed once I produce your heir. I have no real power here. How could I forget? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? She laughed, bitter. You let me play estate manager when it suited you, when you needed someone else to take the risk of caring. But the moment real decisions need to be made, I'm reminded of my place. You don't understand the stakes. I understand perfectly. Her voice rose. I understand you're so terrified of losing control that you'd rather watch everything burn than trust someone else. Trust me. Adrian's face had gone white. Get out. Gladly. She turned toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I thought we were building something. A partnership. Maybe even... She couldn't finish. I was wrong. She left before he could see her cry. In her chambers, Eliza let the tears come. Hot, angry tears that burned tracks down her face. She'd been a fool, had let herself hope that Adrian's smile meant something, that working side by side meant he saw her as an equal. But she was still just a womb, a placeholder, temporary. The word echoed in her skull like a curse. She cried until the tears ran dry. Then she sat at her writing desk and began calculating. Her dowry was nearly gone, spent on conservatory repairs and tenant aid. But she had jewelry, her mother's pearls, her grandmother's ring, things with real value, things she could sell. It wouldn't be enough to save the estate, not even close, but it might be enough to help the tenants, to finish the cottage repairs at least, to give them a chance even if the manor fell. The decision should have felt impossible. It didn't. She knew what it was like to be powerless, to watch everything crumble while the powerful protected themselves. She wouldn't do that to the people who'd trusted her, even if it meant defying Adrian directly, especially if it meant that. The next morning, she took the jewelry to the village jeweler, a nervous man who kept glancing toward the manor as if expecting Adrian to materialize and stop the transaction. Are you certain, Your Grace? These are family pieces. I'm certain. Eliza pushed the velvet cases across the counter. Fair value, no haggling. He named a sum that made her breath catch, more than she'd expected, enough to finish all the tenant repairs and still have a cushion for emergencies. Done. The money felt heavy in her reticule on the walk back, heavy and dangerous. She was directly contradicting Adrian's orders, using her own resources to fund a project he'd explicitly refused. This was mutiny. She didn't care. She found Mr. Pemberton in his office and laid out the plan. Finish all tenant cottage repairs immediately, forgive this quarter's rent, use the remaining funds to hire 3 families from the neighboring estate whose livelihoods had collapsed after their lord died. Your Grace, His Grace has ordered all work stopped. I'm countermanding that order. Pemberton's eyes went wide. You can't. I can, and I am. She met his gaze steadily. I'm the Duchess of Blackmore. These are my people too. And I'm using my personal funds for this project, not estate money. His Grace has no grounds to object. That was legally questionable at best, but Pemberton didn't challenge it. If His Grace finds out, let me worry about that. The work resumed that afternoon. Eliza threw herself into it with desperate energy, working alongside the carpenters and masons, helping where she could, coordinating where she couldn't. The tenants watched her with a mix of awe and concern. Your Grace, you shouldn't be doing heavy labor, Mrs. Mitchell said, trying to take a hammer from Eliza's hands. I'm fine. His Grace won't like it. His Grace doesn't have to like it. The words came out sharper than intended. Eliza softened. I'm sorry, I need to do this. Mrs. Mitchell studied her with knowing eyes. Trouble between you and His Grace? That's an understatement. He's a difficult man, stubborn, proud. She smiled slightly. But he's lucky to have you, even if he's too foolish to see it yet. Eliza wanted to believe that. She couldn't quite manage it. For 3 days, the work progressed beautifully. Roofs were repaired, walls reinforced. The new families arrived and were settled in the newly available cottages. The tenant village began to look less like a disaster zone and more like a community. Then Adrian found out. Eliza was inspecting the repaired mill when she heard hoofbeats. She turned to see Adrian riding hard across the field, his expression thunderous. Her stomach dropped. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, stalking toward her with barely contained fury. "What have you done?" She straightened her spine. "What needed doing?" "I ordered the work stopped." "You did." "I countermanded that order." His face flushed dark red. "You had no authority." "I used my own money." She pulled the receipts from her pocket, thrust them at him. "Every penny came from selling my jewelry, not estate funds, my personal property. You have no say in how I use that." Adrian stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "You sold your mother's pearls." "Yes." "Your grandmother's ring." "Yes." "Everything." "Everything." She lifted her chin. "Because these people matter. Because letting them suffer to preserve some illusion of control was wrong. Because someone had to actually lead instead of just managing decline." "You had no right." "I had every right. I'm not just your broodmare, Adrian. I'm a human being with resources and agency and the ability to make my own choices. Choices that undermine everything I'm trying to... Trying to what? Hide? Hoard? You're not trying to save the estate. You're trying to save yourself from feeling anything." The words poured out now, unstoppable. "You've been dead for 10 years. Walking around in a corpse, refusing to live because living means risking loss. Well, I'm not dead. And I won't pretend to be just to make you comfortable." The assembled workers had gone silent. This was a private fight playing out in very public space. Adrian seemed to realize it too, his jaw clenched. "Come with me. Now." "No." "That wasn't a request. And I'm not a servant who takes orders." She turned back to the mill. "I have work to finish." He grabbed her arm. Not hard, not hurting, but the shock of physical contact after weeks of careful distance froze them both. "Please." The word came out strangled. "Eliza, please, just come with me." Something in his voice made her nod. They rode in silence back to the manor, tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. In his study, Adrian paced while Eliza stood by the window, arms crossed. "You can't do this," he said finally. "I already did." "You've put us in an impossible position. If word gets out that the Duchess is selling her jewels, every creditor will know we're desperate. They'll call in debts immediately." "Then we'll deal with it." "How?" He spun to face her. "With what? You've spent your last resources on repairs we can't sustain. What happens next quarter when rents are due and you have nothing left to forgive them with?" "We'll have rebuilt trust, loyalty, a workforce willing to actually produce. You'll have a peasant rebellion when they realize the money's run out and they're expected to pay again." "You don't know that. I know human nature," he was shouting now. "I know people take what they can get and disappear the moment it stops being convenient. I know every investment, every trust, every relationship eventually betrays you." The raw pain in his voice stopped her. "Is that what she did?" Eliza asked quietly. "Your first wife? Betray you?" Adrian went white. "Don't." "Did she die on purpose, to hurt you, to abandon you? Stop." "Or did she just die, Adrian? Did tragedy happen, and you decided it was safer to blame her than to grieve? You know nothing about... I know you've punished everyone around you for 10 years because you couldn't save one person." Her voice cracked. "I know you're so desperate to avoid pain that you've created a life of nothing but pain. And I know I can't live like that. I won't." Silence crashed between them. "What are you saying?" Adrian's voice was barely audible. "I'm saying I'm done being invisible. Done being convenient. Done waiting for you to decide I matter." She pulled off her wedding ring, the simple gold band he'd put on her finger 2 months ago that felt like a lifetime. "I'm saying I want a real marriage or no marriage at all." She set the ring on his desk. Adrian stared at it like it was a live snake. "You can't... We're married. Legally bound. Then legally unbind us. Annulment. Divorce. I don't care." The words hurt to say, but she forced them out. "I won't spend my life as a ghost in your mausoleum." "Where will you go?" "I don't know." She smiled, bitter. "But anywhere is better than nowhere." She turned toward the door. "Wait." Something in his voice made her pause. If I asked you to stay, Adrian said slowly, if I promised to try, to actually try to be different, would you? Eliza looked back at him. At this broken man in his fortress of control, offering the smallest, most terrifying thing he could, hope. I don't know, she said honestly. Would you mean it? Or would you just be trying to secure your heir? I don't know either. He moved to the window, staring out at the grounds. I don't know anything anymore. You've turned my entire world upside down in 2 months. Everything I thought I understood about protection, about safety, you've proven it wrong, and I hate that. I hate feeling this unmoored. But I also can't imagine this place without you in it. He turned to face her. Without you fighting me, challenging me, making me see things I've been avoiding. You terrify me, Eliza. Because caring about you means risking everything I've built to protect myself. Her heart hammered. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want you to leave. His voice dropped. I'm saying that smile you gave Mrs. Mitchell yesterday, like she mattered, like her family's safety was worth more than any amount of money, that's haunted me. Because I realized I haven't cared about anything that purely in a decade, and watching you do it made me want to try. Eliza's throat tightened. Adrian, I can't promise I'll be good at it. Can't promise I won't fall back into old patterns. But if you stay, I'll try. He picked up the ring from his desk, held it out. I'll try to be the man you deserve instead of the corpse I've been. She looked at the ring, at him, at the raw vulnerability in his expression that she knew cost him everything to show. She could walk away, should, probably. He'd hurt her, dismissed her, treated her like an object, but he'd also smiled at her in the rain, worked beside her, shown her, in rare moments, the man he might have been before grief calcified him, and she'd never been good at taking the safe path. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, I'll stay, I'll try too, I'll try. She took the ring, but didn't put it on yet. But things have to change, real change, not just words. What do you want? Partnership. Real partnership. You stop making unilateral decisions about the estate. We work together. Equally. He hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. And you stop hiding from me. From yourself. You let me in, even when it's hard. That one took longer, but finally, I'll try. And you trust me, my judgment, my choices, even when they scare you. His jaw clenched. That's asking a lot. I know. They stood there, the gulf between them smaller but still present, dangerous. There's something else, Adrian said quietly. Something you should know before you decide. Her stomach nodded. What? The investments that failed, the fraud. He looked away. I knew they were risky. The returns were too good, but I was so desperate to build security that I ignored the warning signs. This isn't just bad luck, Eliza. It's my failure, my pride. And I've destroyed us both because of it. The admission clearly cost him. Eliza saw him braced for her condemnation. Instead, she stepped closer. Then we fix it together, she said firmly. We find a way. We rebuild. Together. You're insane. Probably. She managed a small smile. But I'm your kind of insane. If you'll have me. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm, solid, real. I'll have you, he said quietly. If you'll tolerate me. I'll tolerate you. She slipped the ring back on. But I'm still forgiving the tenant rents and finishing the repairs. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Of course you are. And you're going to help me figure out how to make this estate actually profitable instead of just maintained. Ambitious. Necessary. She squeezed his hand. We're in this together now, for real. That means I get a say in how we survive. You've always had a say. I was just too stubborn to listen. And now? Now I'm still stubborn. His smile was real this time, small but genuine. But I'm listening. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. They still had mountains of debt, tenants to support, an estate teetering on the edge of collapse, and between them, a fragile truce built on hope and desperation in equal measure. but it was a start. And as Adrian pulled her close, tentatively, like he was learning how, Eliza let herself believe that starts could sometimes lead somewhere worth going. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and careful navigation. True to his word, Adrian included Eliza in every decision. They met with Pemberton daily, reviewing accounts, looking for inefficiencies, making hard choices about what to cut and what to preserve. Adrian's knowledge of estate management combined with Eliza's fresh perspective created something neither could have achieved alone. It still wasn't easy. Adrian's instinct to control everything died hard. More than once, Eliza caught him making decisions without consulting her, then having to deliberately backtrack and ask her opinion. It was clumsy, uncomfortable for him, but he did it. And slowly, the estate began to stabilize. The tenant families Eliza had recruited proved their worth immediately, skilled workers who'd been desperate for opportunity. They threw themselves into bringing fallow fields back into production. Within a month, the productive acreage had increased 15%. The forgiven rents created exactly the loyalty Eliza had predicted. When word spread that the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore actually cared about their people, applications for tenancy began arriving. Not many, but enough. It was working. Then the letter arrived. Eliza found it on Adrian's desk one morning. He'd fallen asleep there again, working late on accounts. The seal was from a London bank. She shouldn't have opened it. She did anyway. What she read made her blood run cold. The letter confirmed what Adrian had feared. Creditors were circling. The investment scandal had become public knowledge. Multiple banks were calling in loans, demanding immediate payment. The total owed nearly £30,000. They had perhaps £300 in accessible funds. The letter concluded with a deadline, 60 days to pay in full, or the estate would be seized and sold at auction. 60 days. Eliza's hands shook as she set down the paper. They were ruined, completely. Even selling everything wouldn't cover half that sum. You weren't supposed to see that, she jumped. Adrian stood in the doorway, looking haggard. When were you going to tell me? Her voice came out sharper than intended. I don't know. He moved into the room, slumping into a chair. What's the point? There's nothing to be done. There's always something. Not this time. He gestured at the letter. I've tried everything. Begged extensions. Offered payment plans. They're not interested. They want their money or the estate, and we don't have the money. Eliza's mind raced. There had to be something, some asset they'd overlooked. Wait. The entailment, she said suddenly. The estate is entailed, yes? It has to pass to your heir? Yes, but that doesn't help. I don't have an heir yet. But you could. She met his gaze. If I'm pregnant, if there's an heir coming, the entailment would protect the core estate from seizure, wouldn't it? Adrian's expression shifted. Understanding. Then something darker. Eliza, you're not... I might be. She wasn't. Probably. But the possibility existed. You've... Once or twice, before we fought. He stood. But even if you were, it wouldn't be confirmed for months, and they want payment in 60 days. Then we lie. The word hung in the air. Lie? Adrian repeated slowly. We announce I'm pregnant. Create an heir on paper, if not in fact. It buys us time to actually get pregnant, and by the time anyone realizes the timeline is questionable, the legal protections will be in place. That's fraud. That's survival. She moved closer. Adrian, if we lose the estate, those tenant families have nowhere to go. The workers we've hired, the community we're building, all of it disappears. Is following the rules worth that? He stared at her. You're serious? Completely. You understand if we're caught, if it's discovered we've lied about an heir, the scandal would destroy us? We'd lose everything anyway, plus face criminal charges? Then we don't get caught. Her heart hammered. We announce the pregnancy. You invoke the entailment protections. We use the next months to find actual solutions, sell what we can, negotiate better terms, increase estate income. And we actually conceive, so by the time anyone questions the timeline, there's a real child to point to. This is insane. This is desperate. She gripped his hands. But it might work. It's the only thing that might work. Adrian looked at their joined hands, at her face, at the letter that spelled their doom. "If we do this," he said quietly, "we're in it together, completely. No backing out if it goes wrong. I know. You could be tied to a criminal, a fraud, dragged down with me if it fails." "I know that too." She squeezed his hands. "But I'd rather go down fighting beside you than watch from safety while everything burns." For a long moment he was silent. Then, "All right? All right? All right, we do it." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "We lie. We fight. We survive. Together." "Together," she agreed. Neither of them acknowledged what they were really doing, betting everything on a desperate gamble that required them to break laws, deceive creditors, and potentially damn themselves completely. They announced the pregnancy the next day. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Servants wept with joy. Tenants celebrated. Letters poured in from neighboring estates offering congratulations. And most importantly, the banks paused their demands. The entailment protections kicked in automatically upon confirmation of an heir. They'd bought time. Now they just had to use it, and hope to everything holy that they could turn a fiction into reality before the whole house of cards collapsed. But that night, lying in Adrian's arms for the first time as something approaching true partners, Eliza felt the weight of what they'd done settle over her like a shroud. They'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. They'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. The lie sat between them that first morning like a third presence at the breakfast table. Eliza moved the eggs around her plate, not eating, hyper-aware of every servant who entered the room with congratulations sparkling in their eyes. Adrian had barely slept. She'd felt him tossing beside her all night, his breathing uneven with stress. "We need to actually conceive," he said quietly once they were alone. "Soon." "I know." "I mean it, Eliza. If you're not showing in a few months, people will start counting backward. We can claim you miscalculated, but only for so long." She set down her fork. "Then we'd better get started." His eyes met hers, and something heated passed between them. Not the cold efficiency of their early encounters. Something rawer, more desperate. That night, he came to her chambers and stayed. Really stayed. And for the first time, when he touched her, it felt like he was actually present. Not going through motions, but choosing to be there. Choosing her. It still wasn't romance, but it was honest. And in the darkness, wrapped in each other, Eliza let herself hope they might pull this off. The next morning brought their first real test. A letter arrived from Lord Ashford, the neighboring landowner, an old money aristocrat who'd made it clear he found Adrian's modern sensibilities distasteful, and the new Duchess beneath notice. The letter requested a meeting to discuss matters of mutual concern. "He knows something," Adrian said, rereading the note. "He has to." "How could he? We've been careful." "Ashford has spies everywhere. If anyone found out about the investment collapse before we announced the pregnancy..." He stopped, swore. "This could unravel everything." Eliza's stomach nodded. "Then we handle it. Together. What's he likely to want?" "To exploit weakness. That's what men like Ashford do." Adrian paced. "He'll come here playing concerned neighbor, all while looking for openings to seize land, poach tenants, anything that benefits him. So we don't give him openings. Easier said than done when we're barely holding on. Then we fake it." She stood, moving to block his pacing. "Adrian, we're already lying about the pregnancy. What's one more performance?" He looked at her, something like admiration flickering in his expression. "You're getting disturbingly good at deception." "I had a good teacher." She managed a small smile. "My father spent years pretending we weren't broke. I learned from the master." "Your father also lost everything." "Which is why we're going to be smarter than him." Ashford arrived that afternoon in a coach that screamed old wealth, pristine, ostentatious, accompanied by liveried footmen. He was exactly as Eliza remembered from their one previous meeting, late 50s, immaculately dressed, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Blackmore." He clasped Adrian's hand with false warmth. "And the new Duchess. Congratulations on the happy news." "Thank you, Lord Ashford." Eliza kept her voice level. "Won't you come in?" They settled in the drawing room, the same room where Adrian had first dismissed her months ago. Now she sat beside him on the settee, a united front, Ashford noticed. His smile sharpened. I must say the transformation is remarkable, Ashford began, accepting tea from Mrs. Hodge. I've heard extraordinary things. Tenant cottages repaired, new families arriving, even talk of the conservatory being rebuilt. Her Grace has been instrumental in revitalizing the estate, Adrian said smoothly. How modern. Ashford's tone made it sound like an insult. Of course, such ambitious projects require capital, significant capital. Here it comes, Eliza thought. We manage, Adrian replied. Do you? Ashford set down his teacup. Forgive my bluntness, but I've heard concerning rumors. Something about investment losses? A scandal involving fraud? Silence stretched taut. Rumors are often exaggerated, Eliza said before Adrian could respond. Yes, we had exposure to the Hartwell investment collapse. Several estates did. But our position is secure. Is it? Ashford's eyes gleamed. Because I've also heard the banks are circling, calling in loans. And while I'm sure the pregnancy announcement is genuine, his emphasis on the word made it clear he thought otherwise. One does wonder about the timing. Adrian's hand found Eliza's, squeezing tight, warning her to stay calm. The timing is simply fortunate, she said evenly. And yes, we're consolidating some accounts. Standard practice during any financial transition, but the estate is profitable and stable. Stable, Ashford smiled. Interesting word choice. I wonder if your tenants would agree. After all, forgiven rents are generous, but they don't pay next quarter's debts. Our tenants are thriving under fair treatment, Adrian said. His voice had gone cold. Something you might try instead of bleeding yours dry. Color rose in Ashford's cheeks. I came here as a neighbor, to offer assistance if needed. What kind of assistance? Eliza asked, though she already knew. I'm prepared to purchase your north acreage. Fair market value. It would give you immediate capital to address any difficulties. The north acreage. 2,000 acres of prime farmland, the most productive part of the estate. No, Adrian said flatly. You haven't heard my offer. I don't need to. We're not selling. Not even for £15,000. The number hung in the air. It was actually generous, more than fair market value, which made it dangerous. Ashford didn't overpay unless he saw an angle. What's your real game? Eliza leaned forward. Seta. You want our land, but not out of charity. What do you know? Ashford's smile widened. Clever girl. Very well. I know you're desperate. I know the banks want $30,000 within 60 days. I know that even selling everything you own won't cover it. He paused. I also know that pregnancy announcements can be, premature, and that entailment protections only work if there's actually an heir. Eliza's blood went cold. Are you suggesting, Adrian started, I'm suggesting nothing. Merely observing that if, hypothetically, the pregnancy claim were false, and that became public knowledge, you'd face criminal fraud charges on top of financial ruin. Ashford stood. My offer stands. $15,000 for the north acreage. Take it, and I forget any concerns about timing or legitimacy. That's blackmail, Eliza said quietly. That's business. He moved toward the door. You have 3 days to decide. After that, I may feel compelled to share my concerns with certain interested parties. He left with the same false pleasantries he'd arrived with. In the silence that followed, Adrian's composure finally cracked. He grabbed the nearest object, a vase, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, shards raining down like tears. He knows, Adrian said hoarsely. He knows we're lying. He suspects that's not the same. It's enough to destroy us. He turned on her, eyes wild. We should have never. This was insane from the start. Stop. Eliza stood, gripping his arms. Stop spiraling. We knew this was risky. We knew people might question. That's why we need the gamble to pay off. How? He's given us 3 days. Then we have 3 days to find another solution. Her mind raced. The north acreage is worth more than $15,000. We both know it. Ashford's lowballing because he thinks we're desperate enough to take it. We are desperate enough. We're clever enough to do better. She pulled him to the desk, spreading out the estate maps. Look, what if we don't sell the land outright? What if we lease it? Leasing generates a fraction of sale value. In the short term, yes, but long term, we retain ownership and generate steady income. And more importantly, she traced the property lines. If we lease to multiple smaller farmers instead of one large estate, we create jobs, loyalty. People invested in our success. Adrian stared at the map. That would take months to arrange. We don't have months. We have 60 days. That's enough to negotiate lease agreements, collect advance payments, and demonstrate to the banks that we have income generation plans. Her finger moved to other sections. Plus, we sell non-essential assets. The London house, it's mortgaged anyway, might as well unload it. The artwork in the West Wing that no one looks at. The silver we don't use. That might cover 10, maybe 12,000 if we're lucky. Then we find the rest elsewhere. She met his eyes. What about other estates? Neighbors facing similar pressures after the investment scandal. What about them? They're vulnerable too. What if we formed a consortium, pool resources, negotiate collectively with the banks for better terms? Adrian's expression shifted. A collective bargaining agreement. Exactly. The banks want their money, but they don't want multiple estates collapsing simultaneously. That floods the market, drives down property values, hurts everyone. If we present a unified plan for structured repayment, they might accept terms. He shook his head slowly. That's actually brilliant, but organizing it in 3 days, then we'd better start writing letters. They worked through the night. Adrian drafted proposals to neighboring estates he knew had been affected by the Hartwell collapse. Eliza calculated lease structures for the North Acreage, balancing income generation against fair terms that would attract quality tenants. They made lists of assets to sell, prioritizing items that would fetch high prices without devastating the manor's functionality. By dawn, they had a framework. Fragile, dependent on a dozen things going right, but a framework nonetheless. This could actually work, Adrian said, staring at their notes. He looked exhausted, hopeful. If enough estates join the consortium, if the banks agree to negotiate, if we can lease the acreage quickly. A lot of ifs. Better than certainties leading to ruin. He pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. How are you so calm about this? I'm not. Eliza's hands were shaking. I'm terrified, but I'm also angry. Ashford thinks he can swoop in and profit from our crisis? He can rot. Adrian laughed, surprised. Remind me never to underestimate you. Too late. You already did. But she smiled when she said it. The next 72 hours were brutal. Letters went out to 7 estates. 3 responded positively within 24 hours, all facing similar pressure, all desperate for solutions. 2 more came tentatively on board after Adrian wrote out personally to make his case. The final 2 refused, too proud or too far gone to accept collective action. 5 estates was enough. Adrian presented the consortium proposal to the banks himself, taking Eliza with him to London. It was her first trip to the city, and she barely saw any of it, just the insides of increasingly hostile banking offices. This is unprecedented, the head banker said, reviewing their terms. You're asking us to accept partial payment now and extended terms on the remainder, based on projected income that may not materialize. We're asking you to be pragmatic, Eliza countered. If you force seizure, you'll flood the market with 5 estates simultaneously. Property values will crater. You'll recover a fraction of what we're offering through structured repayment. And if your projections are wrong, if the leases don't generate expected income, then you seize then, Adrian said, but you'll have received partial payment in the interim, putting you in a better position than seizing now. The banker studied them. And the pregnancy? I assume that's genuine? Eliza's heart hammered. Of course. Because if it's not, if you've invoked entailment protections under false pretenses, that changes everything. The pregnancy is real, Adrian said firmly, and irrelevant to this proposal. We're offering sound financial planning, not legal maneuvering. More silence. The banker exchanged glances with his colleagues. We'll need documentation, lease agreements, asset appraisals, proof of consortium commitments. You'll have them within the week, Eliza promised, and verification of the pregnancy from a physician. Her blood went cold. I beg your pardon? Standard practice for entailment claims involving debt negotiation. We'll need medical confirmation before finalizing any agreement. She felt Adrian tense beside her. That's invasive, she said carefully, and unnecessary. The pregnancy will be evident within months. We're not waiting months. Either you provide medical verification within 2 weeks, or the entailment protections are suspended pending confirmation. The banker's smile was sharp. Surely that's not unreasonable? If the claim is genuine, they had no choice. Fine, Eliza said. 2 weeks. You'll have your verification. Outside, in the carriage back to the inn, Adrian was white-faced. We're finished. You can't produce medical verification of a pregnancy that doesn't exist. Can't I? Eliza's mind was already working. Doctors are human, fallible. What if one makes a mistake? You're suggesting we bribe a physician to lie? I'm suggesting we find one willing to be optimistic in his assessment. She gripped his hand. Adrian, we've come too far to give up now. The consortium is forming. The banks are negotiating. We just need 2 weeks. And if we get caught? We won't. You can't know that. No, but I know giving up guarantees we lose. Fighting gives us a chance. She met his eyes. I'm choosing the chance. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we find a doctor, somehow. The solution came from an unexpected source. Back at Blackmore, Eliza confided in Tessie, carefully, vaguely, saying only that she needed a doctor who would be discreet about the pregnancy's exact timing. There's Dr. Fletcher in the village, Tessie said thoughtfully. He's older, forgetful, gets dates mixed up all the time. Last year he swore Mrs. Patterson's baby was due in August when it was clearly October. She paused. Course, he's also a drunk. His medical opinion isn't worth much. Perfect, Eliza breathed. Doctor. Fletcher was indeed forgetful, and indeed fond of drink. For a generous fee and a few bottles of decent whiskey, he agreed to examine the Duchess and provide documentation. Now, Your Grace, when did you say your last courses were? He asked, fumbling with his notes. Early November, Eliza lied smoothly. It was late January now. The timeline would work if she actually conceived in the next few weeks. November. Yes, that would make you... He squinted at a calendar. 12 weeks along? 13? Something like that. He prodded her abdomen perfunctorily. Yes. I can feel the quickening. Definitely pregnant. Due in... More squinting. August. Perhaps September. Eliza's due date, if she conceived immediately, would be October. Close enough for confusion, especially from a drunk who could barely read his own handwriting. Thank you, Doctor. Happy to help. Wonderful news for the estate. He packed his bag, pocketing his fee. Send for me if you have any concerns. I'll check in monthly to monitor progress. Once he left, Eliza leaned against the door and let out a shaky laugh. They'd done it. Somehow. Against all odds and basic morality, they'd created medical documentation for a pregnancy that didn't exist yet. Now they just needed to make it real. Adrian found her in the conservatory, or what would be the conservatory. Construction had resumed, funded by advance lease payments from the North Acreage. The skeleton was taking shape again, glass panels being installed, the interior cleared and prepared for replanting. Dr. Fletcher came through? He asked. Like a champion, drunk, confused, and utterly convinced I'm 3 months along. We're terrible people. Probably. She turned to face him. Does that bother you? It should. He moved closer. But mostly I'm just relieved and terrified and... He paused. Grateful. For you. For your insane willingness to fight for this place. It's my place too now. Is it? His hand came up to cup her face. Or are you still planning to leave once the heir is born and your obligation is fulfilled? The question hung between them. Eliza realized she didn't know the answer anymore. I don't know, she admitted. Do you want me to stay, really? Or do you just need the heir? I needed the heir. His thumb traced her cheekbone. But somewhere along the way, I started needing you, your strength, your ridiculous optimism, the way you don't back down even when I'm being impossible. You're always impossible. Exactly. His smile was soft, genuine. You're the only person who's ever called me on it, who's pushed back, made me better. Eliza's heart clenched. Adrian, I love you. The words came quiet, certain. I didn't want to, didn't plan to, but I do. And if you leave after this is over, I'll survive. But I'd rather you stayed. She stared at him, speechless. He loved her. This cold, broken man who'd dismissed her as breeding stock 3 months ago, he loved her. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks now. I just didn't want to admit it because it made everything more complicated. It does make things complicated. Terribly complicated. Worth it, though? Yeah. She pulled him down for a kiss. Definitely worth it. They made love there among the construction debris, surrounded by the ghost of his first wife's dream and the hope of their future. And afterward, lying in his arms with sawdust in her hair and her heart full to breaking, Eliza let herself believe they might actually survive this. 2 weeks later, they presented Dr. Fletcher's documentation to the banks. The verification was accepted without question. A doddering country doctor's word carried weight, apparently, especially when accompanied by dates and medical jargon that sounded official. The consortium proposal was approved with modifications, structured payments over 18 months, interest at premium rates, strict oversight of estate finances. But approved. They had breathing room. News of the consortium spread quickly. What had started as desperate survival became something else, a model. Other estates began inquiring about joining. The banks, sensing opportunity, offered to extend the program to additional properties. Within a month, 12 estates had joined the collective bargaining agreement. And Blackmore, the estate everyone had written off as dying, became its center. Adrian was asked to speak at a landowners' gathering in London about the consortium model. Eliza went with him, watching from the audience as her husband, once so determined to hide, stood before his peers and spoke about cooperation, innovation, and the necessity of adapting to survive. He was brilliant. Afterward, they were approached by other aristocrats seeking advice. The Duke of Blackmore and his Duchess, pioneers of a new approach to estate management. We're going to survive this, Adrian said that night in their London hotel room. Against all odds, we're actually going to survive. We are, Eliza agreed. Then, softer. And the baby? They'd been trying, earnestly, but so far, nothing. We have time, Adrian said, but uncertainty shadowed his eyes. And if it doesn't happen, if I can't conceive, then we face that when we must. He pulled her close, one crisis at a time. But the crisis came sooner than expected. They returned to Blackmore to find Lord Ashford waiting. Congratulations on your consortium, he said without preamble. Very clever. You've bought yourself time. What do you want, Ashford? Adrian asked coldly. To acknowledge when I've been outmaneuvered. Ashford's smile was thin. You've secured your estate, stabilized your finances, even gained prestige. Well played. Thank you. Now leave. In a moment, as Ashford turned to Eliza. I underestimated you, Duchess. That was foolish. You're far more formidable than you appear. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. He paused. I also wanted to apologize. My attempt to exploit your difficulties was ungentlemanly. Adrian laughed bitterly. You're apologizing? After blackmail? I'm acknowledging the game has changed. Ashford's eyes glittered. You've won this round, but I'm a patient man, and I'm still curious about that pregnancy's timing. Eliza's stomach dropped. What are you implying? She asked quietly. Nothing at all. Simply noting that 12 weeks can become 13 very easily when a country doctor is involved, and that babies sometimes arrive early. He smiled. Or late. Amazing how flexible these things can be. Get out, Adrian said, low, dangerous. Of course. Ashford tipped his hat. Do give my regards to Dr. Fletcher, charming man, terrible head for dates. He left them standing in the drive, his threat hanging in the air like poison. He knows, Eliza breathed. He suspects. Still. He's going to keep watching, waiting for us to slip. Then we don't slip. Adrian pulled her against him. We make this real, Eliza. Whatever it takes. She nodded against his chest, fear and determination warring in her gut. They'd bought time, saved the estate, formed something real between them. But the lie still remained, ticking like a bomb, waiting to explode. That night, Eliza stood at her window looking out over the grounds. The conservatory was taking shape beautifully. The tenant village looked prosperous. The fields were planted and promising. They'd transformed everything, together. But in her belly, where a child should be quickening, nothing. And each day that passed brought them closer to the moment when absence became evidence. Please, she whispered to the darkness, to fate, to whatever forces governed these things. Please let this work. Behind her, Adrian slept peacefully for the first time in months. She couldn't bear to tell him that despite everything they'd achieved, they were still one medical examination away from complete destruction. 3 weeks later, she finally felt it. The subtle shift, the telltale nausea, the tenderness. She was pregnant. Actually, truly pregnant. The relief was so profound she actually wept. They'd done it. The lie had become truth. Dr. Fletcher's confused timeline would hold up because there was now a real child to anchor it to. When she told Adrian, he picked her up and spun her, laughing with something that sounded like joy and terror combined. We did it, he said. Against everything, we actually did it. We did, she agreed. And for the first time since this whole mad gamble began, Eliza let herself believe they might actually have a future. And for the first time since this whole mad gamble began, Eliza let herself believe they might actually have a future. The belief lasted exactly 4 days. That's when Mrs. Hodge appeared in the morning room with a letter, her expression somewhere between vindicated and terrified. This arrived from London, Your Grace. She extended it to Adrian like it might bite. Marked urgent. Eliza watched her husband's face drain of color as he read. His hands started shaking. What is it? She asked, though dread already coiled in her stomach. The banks are sending an auditor. His voice came out flat. Dead. To verify our financials before finalizing the consortium agreement. They'll be here in 3 days. That's good, isn't it? Our books are clean now. They're also sending a medical examiner. He looked up and she saw the fear naked in his eyes. To independently verify the pregnancy timeline for the official records. The room tilted. An independent examiner, not doctor. Fletcher with his convenient confusion and whiskey-soaked memory. A real doctor who would measure, calculate, examine, and discover that the dates didn't match. That the 12-week pregnancy claim made 8 weeks ago was impossible if she'd only conceived 3 weeks prior. They'd been caught. We could run, Eliza heard herself say. Leave England, start over somewhere, and abandon everyone? The tenants? The consortium members counting on us? Adrian shook his head. Even if I could live with that, which I can't, we'd be fugitives. Wanted for fraud. They'd find us eventually. Then we fight. We explain. Explain what? That we lied about the pregnancy to invoke legal protections we weren't entitled to? That's fraud, Eliza. Criminal fraud. We could both go to prison. She sank into a chair, mind racing through scenarios, none of them ending well. There has to be something, she whispered. Some way out. Adrian crouched in front of her, taking her hands. I'm so sorry. I should never have let you talk me into this insanity. This is my fault. It's our fault. Our choice. She squeezed his fingers. We made it together. We faced the consequences together. Noble. Also terrifying. He managed a broken smile. I love you. I need you to know that. Whatever happens, don't. She pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't say goodbye yet. We have 3 days. Maybe we can think of something. But 3 days passed in a blur of desperation and failed plans. They considered bribing the examiner, but couldn't risk it. Considered forging new documents, but any investigation would uncover the deception. Considered claiming a miscarriage and starting over, but the timing made that suspicious too. Every scenario ended in exposure. The morning the auditor and medical examiner arrived, Eliza dressed with numb fingers. She was actually pregnant now, 12 weeks along for real. But the timeline was damning. Any competent doctor would see immediately that she couldn't have been pregnant when they'd claimed. Whatever happens, Adrian said, helping her with her necklace, I won't let them blame you. This was my idea initially. I'll take full responsibility. Like hell you will. She turned to face him. We're partners. That means equal credit and equal blame. He pulled her close, and they stood there holding each other until Tessie knocked to announce the visitors had arrived. The auditor was exactly what Eliza expected, a pinched man with spectacles who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. But the medical examiner surprised her. Dr. Margaret Wells was perhaps 50, with keen eyes and an air of competence that made Eliza's stomach drop. A real doctor. Who would see through their lies in minutes? Your Grace, Dr. Wells nodded to Eliza. I understand congratulations are in order. Thank you. Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'll need to conduct a thorough examination. Standard procedure for legal documentation. I'm sure you understand. Of course. What else could she say? They settled in Eliza's chambers while Adrian dealt with the auditor downstairs. Dr. Wells was professional, methodical, and absolutely impossible to read as she conducted her examination. You're approximately 12 weeks along, she said finally. Give or take a few days. Yes. Eliza's heart hammered. That matches Dr. Fletcher's assessment. Does it? Dr. Wells made notes. According to his documentation, you were 12 weeks along 8 weeks ago, which would make you 20 weeks now, but you're clearly not. The trap had sprung. Eliza's mouth went dry. There must have been some confusion. Dr. Fletcher is older, and sometimes his dates are catastrophically wrong, yes. Dr. Wells set down her pen. I'm aware of his reputation, which raises questions about why a duchess would rely on a country drunk for such important medical documentation. This was it, the moment everything fell apart. Dr. Wells, I can explain. Can you? The doctor's expression was unreadable. Can you explain why you claimed to be 12 weeks pregnant when you were not? Why you invoked legal protections based on false information? Why you committed fraud? Tears burned Eliza's eyes. I was desperate. We were desperate. The estate was collapsing. People would have lost their homes, their livelihoods. I know that doesn't excuse it, but... Stop! Dr. Wells held up a hand. I don't need your confession. I already know what happened. Eliza's breath caught. You... know? I make it my business to know. The doctor stood, moving to the window. I've been watching this estate's transformation for months. The tenant improvements, the consortium formation, the innovative approaches to land management. Very impressive. Thank you? Eliza had no idea where this was going. I've also been watching you specifically, Your Grace. A woman sold into marriage to save her family, dismissed and demeaned by her husband, who could have simply accepted her powerlessness, but instead fought back, rebuilt, created something extraordinary from nothing. Dr. Wells turned to face her. You remind me of myself 30 years ago, she continued quietly. I was supposed to marry well, produce heirs, fade into domestic obscurity. Instead, I studied medicine over my family's objections, faced down every man who said women couldn't be doctors, built a practice from scratch. She smiled slightly. So when I was asked to examine you, I did my research first, and I discovered something interesting. Eliza waited, barely breathing. Dr. Fletcher's original documentation is indeed wrong, catastrophically so. Dr. Wells pulled out papers. However, medical examinations can be, imprecise. Dates can be estimates rather than certainties. And it's entirely possible that you genuinely believed yourself to be 12 weeks along when you were actually only 4 weeks pregnant. Early pregnancies are notoriously difficult to date accurately. Hope flared in Eliza's chest. What are you saying? I'm saying my official report will indicate that Dr. Fletcher made an honest mistake in his initial dating, that you are currently 12 weeks pregnant, not 20, that the discrepancy is explained by the unreliability of early examination techniques. She met Eliza's eyes. I'm saying I'm giving you a way out. Why? The word came out choked. Why would you risk your reputation to help us? Because I believe in what you're doing. The consortium, the tenant reforms, the idea that estates should serve people, not just preserve aristocratic power. Dr. Wells smiled. And because watching you fight has reminded me why I fought. Women like us don't get many allies, Your Grace. When we find each other, we help. Eliza couldn't speak, couldn't process that salvation had arrived from the most unexpected source. There is one condition, Dr. Wells added. Anything. You continue what you've started, the reforms, the innovations. You make Blackmore a model for how estates should operate, and when other women need help, when they're trapped in impossible situations like you were, you help them the way I'm helping you now. Yes, Eliza nodded frantically. Yes, absolutely. I swear it. Good. Dr. Wells gathered her papers. Then as far as the banks and anyone else are concerned, you are 12 weeks pregnant, due in late summer, and the previous confusion was simply medical imprecision. Understood? Understood. Dr. Wells, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Prove me right. The doctor moved toward the door. Make this count, Your Grace. Make every risk worth it. Then she was gone, leaving Eliza shaking with relief so profound she thought she might faint. They'd been saved. By a woman who understood what it meant to fight against a system designed to crush you, who saw herself in Eliza's struggle and chose mercy over judgment. Downstairs, she found Adrian pale-faced in his study, the auditor still poring over ledgers. The books are in order, the auditor said without looking up. Barely, but the consortium structure is sound, assuming the medical documentation checks out. It does. Dr. Wells appeared in the doorway. The Duchess is 12 weeks pregnant, due in August. All legal requirements are satisfied. Adrian's eyes met Eliza's. She saw the question there, how? And gave the tiniest shake of her head. Later. The auditor gathered his papers. Very well, I'll report to the banks that Blackmore's consortium participation is approved. You'll receive final terms within the week. Just like that, it was over. They were legitimate, legal, saved. Once the visitors departed, Adrian pulled Eliza into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. What happened up there? He demanded. How did you? She told him. Everything. Dr. Wells' confession, her understanding, her choice to help. When she finished, Adrian was silent for a long moment. We don't deserve that kindness, he said finally. Maybe not, but we're going to earn it. Eliza pulled back to look at him. We're going to make this estate everything we promised, not just for us, for everyone who depends on it. A heavy responsibility. The best kind. He kissed her then, deep and desperate and grateful. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Eliza felt like they might actually be free. The following months transformed Blackmore beyond recognition. With the consortium officially approved and structured payments arranged, the immediate financial crisis eased. Adrian threw himself into estate management with an energy Eliza had never seen, working alongside tenants, consulting with agricultural experts, implementing crop rotation systems that increased yields by 30%. The conservatory was completed in May, a glittering jewel of glass and greenery that took Eliza's breath away every time she entered. They filled it with plants from all over England, some from the original collection that Barnaby had saved, others new additions. It became a gathering place for the estate, somewhere workers could rest during breaks, somewhere children could play among the ferns. The tenant village flourished. Word of fair treatment and actual support spread through the county, and applications for tenancy poured in. They were selective, choosing families with skills that complemented the estate's needs. A blacksmith, a skilled carpenter, a teacher who started a proper school in the refurbished village hall. By midsummer, Blackmore had gone from dying estate to thriving community. The consortium expanded to 18 estates. Adrian was invited to speak at Parliament about rural reform and cooperative economics. Journalists came from London to write about the Blackmore model, this radical idea that treating workers fairly and investing in infrastructure could actually be profitable. And through it all, Eliza's pregnancy progressed. She grew round and uncomfortable, unable to ride or work the gardens as she once had. But she found other ways to contribute, managing accounts, coordinating with other consortium estates, planning the expansion of the school. You're supposed to be resting, Adrian scolded one afternoon, finding her at her desk surrounded by papers. I'll rest when I'm dead. She shifted, trying to ease the ache in her back. We need to finalize the teacher contracts before autumn term starts. We have people who can handle that. I want to handle it. She looked up at him. This matters, Adrian. Education matters. If we want real change, lasting change, it starts with giving children opportunities their parents never had. He crouched beside her chair, pressing a kiss to her swollen belly. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm stubborn. Same thing. He helped her stand. Come on. Dr. Wells is here for your checkup. Dr. Wells had become a regular visitor, monitoring Eliza's pregnancy with professional care and personal interest. She'd also become something like a friend, one of the few people who knew the truth about everything and chose to support them anyway. You're doing wonderfully, she said after the examination. Baby's strong. Heartbeat excellent. Another month and you'll be holding your child. Another month of feeling like a whale, you mean? Dr. Wells laughed. That too. But worth it, I think. Definitely worth it. Eliza rested her hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. Thank you for everything. We wouldn't be here without you. You would have found another way. People like you always do. Dr. Wells packed her bag. I have news, actually. I've been approached by 3 other estates asking about medical support for their workers. Seems word has spread about Blackmore providing actual health care to tenants. That's wonderful. It's revolutionary, is what it is. The doctor smiled. You're changing more than just this estate, Your Grace. You're changing expectations, showing what's possible. Other aristocrats are being forced to ask why they can't do the same. Good. They should be uncomfortable. Spoken like a true reformer. Dr. Wells moved toward the door. I'll check on you next week. Send for me immediately if anything changes. That night, Eliza stood in the conservatory watching dusk paint the glass panels gold and amber. The baby was active, shifting and kicking, reminding her constantly of the life growing inside her, the life they'd lied to protect. That had become real through sheer desperation and luck. Couldn't sleep? Adrian appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her expanded waist. Too much movement. She leaned back against him. Our child is apparently training for a boxing match. Takes after their mother, stubborn and fierce. Or their father, impossible and proud. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the beauty they'd fought so hard to create. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked quietly. The lies, the fraud, everything we did to get here. Adrian was silent for a moment. I regret that we had to do it. I regret that the world is built in a way that made those choices necessary. He turned her to face him. But I don't regret fighting. I don't regret choosing you, and I don't regret what we've built. Even though we broke laws, committed fraud, we broke unjust laws to serve justice. That's not the same as being criminals. Tell that to the courts if we'd been caught. We weren't caught. We were saved by someone who understood what we were fighting for. He pressed his forehead to hers. The world isn't black and white, Eliza. Sometimes you have to bend rules to serve what's right. We did that, and I'd do it again. Me too, she whispered. The baby kicked hard enough to make them both laugh. Someone's impatient to join the world, Adrian said. Can't imagine where they got that from. 3 weeks later, on a sweltering August afternoon, Eliza's water broke. The labor was long, brutal. Eliza had known it would hurt, but knowing and experiencing were different universes. She screamed, swore, threatened to divorce Adrian for doing this to her, all while he held her hand and looked more terrified than she'd ever seen him. You're doing beautifully, Dr. Wells said, calm as ever. Almost there. I'm dying, Eliza gasped. You're not dying, you're giving birth. Similar sensations, different outcomes. Not helping, but finally, after hours that felt like years, a baby's cry split the air. A girl, Dr. Wells announced, placing the tiny, screaming bundle on Eliza's chest. Healthy and furious. Congratulations. Eliza looked down at her daughter, red-faced, wrinkled, absolutely perfect, and felt something inside her crack open. Love so fierce it hurt. Wonder so profound it erased every painful second of the previous hours. She's perfect, she breathed. She is, Adrian agreed, tears streaming down his face as he touched their daughter's tiny hand. She's absolutely perfect. They named her Catherine. Catherine Margaret Blackmore. Catherine for Adrian's mother, Margaret for the doctor who'd saved them. Dr. Wells cried when they told her. "You'll make me soft," she protested, wiping her eyes. "You're already soft," Eliza said. "You just hide it behind competence." "Fair enough." Dr. Wells smiled down at the baby. "She's going to change the world, this one. I can feel it." "She already has," Adrian said quietly, "just by existing." The christening was held in late September in the village church, a simple affair by aristocratic standards, but packed with everyone from the estate. Tenants crowded in beside servants, workers alongside managers. The barriers that usually separated classes felt thinner here, less rigid. Lord Ashford attended, looking sour. "Congratulations on your heir," he said to Adrian afterward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Right on schedule, how fortunate." "Isn't it?" Adrian's tone was pleasant, dangerous. "Almost like we knew exactly what we were doing." "Almost." Ashford's gaze slid to Catherine, sleeping peacefully in Eliza's arms. "She's quite small for a full-term baby." "She's perfectly healthy," Eliza said firmly. "Dr. Wells confirmed it." "I'm sure she did." Ashford's expression was knowing. "Well, as long as the official records are in order, what does it matter? Timing, dates, such imprecise things." He walked away before either could respond. "He still suspects," Eliza said quietly. "Let him suspect. He can't prove anything. And even if he could..." Adrian looked around at the assembled crowd, at the estate they'd built, at the community that had formed. "Even if he could, I don't think anyone would care. We've proven ourselves. Not through bloodline or timing, but through actual work." He was right. The whispers and doubts that had plagued Eliza's early months at Blackmore had evaporated. She was respected now, valued, not as the Duke's wife, but as a force in her own right. That evening, after the guests had departed and Catherine was settled in her cradle, Eliza and Adrian stood on the terrace overlooking the grounds. The conservatory glowed in the dusk, lit from within. The village beyond showed warm lights in every window. The fields stretched fertile and productive toward the horizon. "We did it," Eliza said softly. "Against everything, we actually did it." "You did it," Adrian corrected. "I was just trying to survive. You were trying to live. There's a difference." "We did it together." She took his hand. "That's what matters." "Together," he agreed. "Always." They stood there as darkness fell, watching the estate breathe and thrive around them. 3 years later, Eliza stood in the same spot and marveled at how much had changed. Catherine was a whirlwind of energy at 3, running through the conservatory, demanding to know the name of every plant, already showing signs of her mother's stubborn curiosity. A son, Thomas, had followed 18 months after Catherine's birth. The nursery was chaos. Eliza wouldn't have it any other way. The consortium had grown to 32 estates. Parliament had actually passed some of Adrian's proposed reforms around tenant rights and land management. Other aristocrats grumbled about the changes, but they couldn't argue with results. Consortium estates were consistently more profitable and stable than traditionally managed ones. Blackmore itself had become something of a pilgrimage site for reformers. People came from across England to study their methods, tour the tenant village, observe the school that now educated over 60 children. Mrs. Hodge had retired, reluctantly, bitterly, but retired nonetheless. Her replacement was younger, more progressive, actually smiled occasionally. And Eliza had started something new. A fund to help women in situations like her own had been. Daughters sold into marriage, wives trapped with abusive husbands, women with no resources or recourse. The fund provided money for legal fees, medical care, education, job training, whatever was needed to create independence. Dr. Wells helped administer it. So did several other women they'd connected with over the years. It was small still, but growing. "Mama!" Catherine came running, clutching a frog she'd found near the conservatory pond. "Look! Can we keep him?" "Absolutely not," Eliza said, trying not to laugh at her daughter's mud-streaked face. "But you can visit him in the pond every day." "Promise?" "Promise." Catherine ran off to return the frog, already chattering to it about their future visits. "She's exactly like you," Adrian said, appearing with Thomas balanced on his hip. impossible, demanding, completely unstoppable. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. He shifted Thomas to free a hand, pulling Eliza close. Do you remember that first night, when I told you all I needed was an heir and you should stay out of my way? Vividly. I wanted to punch you. You should have. I was an ass. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for not giving up on me, on this place, on us. Thank you for being worth the fight. They watched their children play, Catherine showing Thomas the frog, both of them laughing in the fading light. Beyond them, the estate hummed with life. Workers heading home from the fields, families gathering for dinner, the school bell ringing one last time, a world they'd built from nothing, from desperation and lies and desperate hope. Do you ever think about it? Adrian asked quietly. What we did? The fraud? Sometimes. Eliza leaned into him. But then I look at all this, at what we created, at the lives we've changed, and I think, maybe sometimes you have to break the rules to make things right. Dangerous philosophy. Says the man who helped me commit fraud. He laughed. Fair point. Catherine came running back, demanding they all come see the sunset from the conservatory. They went, all four of them, and stood among the plants watching light paint the glass panels in shades of fire and gold. It's beautiful, Catherine breathed. It is, Eliza agreed. But she wasn't looking at the sunset. She was looking at her family, at the estate beyond, at everything they'd fought for and won. Years ago, she'd arrived at Blackmore as an unwanted bride, invisible, powerless, sold to save her family and promptly dismissed by the man who'd bought her. She'd survived that, fought back, refused to fade, and in refusing to fade, she'd transformed everything, not just the estate, not just her marriage, but herself. She was no longer Eliza Whitmore, the overlooked daughter, no longer just the Duchess of Blackmore, defined by title and duty. She was Eliza, fighter, reformer, mother, partner, force of nature who'd taken a dying estate and a broken man and built something extraordinary from the ruins. Mama, you're crying, Catherine said, concerned. Happy tears, Eliza assured her, wiping her eyes. Just happy tears. Adrian squeezed her hand, understanding without words. They'd lied, cheated, broken laws, committed fraud. They'd also survived, built, created, changed lives. The world wasn't black and white, morality wasn't simple. And sometimes, the greatest acts of courage looked like the worst acts of desperation until history had time to judge them fairly. Eliza didn't know how history would judge them, didn't particularly care. She knew only this. She'd been sold into a cold marriage with a colder man. She'd been dismissed, demeaned, told to stay quiet and invisible. And she'd refused. She'd fought, gambled, lied, loved. She'd survived. And in surviving, she'd become exactly who she was always meant to be. The sun set beyond the conservatory glass, painting everything gold. Catherine chased fireflies. Thomas laughed in Adrian's arms. The estate breathed its evening song around them. And Eliza Blackmore, once invisible, now unstoppable, stood at the center of it all and smiled. They'd built a future from ashes, and it was beautiful.